Hello, I'm Jason Rankin and welcome to the GrassCheck Podcast, brought to you by AgResearch and AFBI. We are bringing you the latest information, insights and opinion to improve grazing management on your farm. This week we are joined by Kat Huson and Francis Lively from AFBI to discuss the latest information from the GrassCheck plots and farms, as well as Paul Turley, a GrassCheck beef farmer from Downpatrick. So, Kat, in recent weeks, we have seen grass growth return to the seasonal norm. Has this trend continued this week?
So we've been seeing growth sort of just a little bit above average the last couple of weeks, and sort of sitting thereabouts again this week, bang on average, about 72 kilograms on the GrassCheck plots. And similar figures, just a little bit lower on the farms at 68 and 60 for the dairy and beef and sheep respectively.
Has the recent surge in grass growth made up for the depressed growth in May and June due to the prolonged spell of dry weather?
So unfortunately not quite. So we did see some very high growth rates coming through in July, sort of set figures of 70 to 80 kilograms dry matter per hectare per day. And we'd normally be seeing figures around about in the 60s at that time of year. So those were well above normal, but the extra growth that we had through July tailed off and we were back around normal growth rates to the end of July. So the extra yield we've had on the GrassCheck plots in Hillsborough was only an additional 163 kilograms above that average figure. That's nowhere near enough to counteract the below average growth that we've seen this spring. And with that being felt much more keenly in the east, the yields from our plots from March to the end of July, they'd normally be about 8.6 tonne at this time of year. And they're just 6.9 tonne this year. Figures from farms in County Down are averaging a yield of 7 tonne from March to the end of July as well. So we're looking to be around about 1.7 tonne of dry matter down on the long-term average for this time of year. The data we're seeing that's coming in from farms in the west is showing a slightly better picture because they didn't suffer so much with that dry weather earlier in the year, and they've got average yields sitting around 7.8 to 8 tonne at the moment. But I think it's pretty unlikely that we're going to get a bumper grass yield for this year.
What growth are you forecasting for the coming 2 weeks?
So the forecast at the moment got 67 kilograms for the next 7 days and 63 in the 14-day forecast. So that's pretty much where we'd expect it to be for the next few weeks in August. Where we've had some really heavy rain, we might see slightly lower figures than that coming through where the ground is really saturated, but better draining fields hopefully will be around about average.
Kat, we've seen a lot of rainfall recently. What effect is that having on grass quality?
It's been a lot of rainfall the past few weeks. The last sort of 7 days, sort of Monday to Monday, before we're recording this podcast, we were seeing average of over 30 millimetres of rain across the GrassCheck network. We had some farms recording over 50 millimetres in that 7 day period, and then we've had a lot more rain since then as well. So we're seeing dry matters really start to fall away. They were sitting at 16.9% last week, and they're down to 14.9% on average this week. Some of the samples we've had coming in have been as low as 11%, and the samples that came off the Hillsborough plots on Monday of dry matter values for those was just 13%. We're starting to see ME values get really quite variable as well. It's fallen back slightly on average. Last week they were at 11.5 and this week they're 11.4. But when I look at the range of samples that are coming in from farms, we've got 2 farms this week that had come in at values of 10.6 and 10.7. But we've still got a couple of farms with values coming in over 12 as well. So that's probably something to keep an eye on because it is just quite variable depending on what your individual situation is.
Francis, what can beef farmers expect to get from grass at the moment?
Really, the expectation from what you can get in terms of animal performance from grass is totally driven by the quality of the grass that the animals are consuming. So there would obviously be a large variation. Kat has already highlighted that. But if we look at the average quality at the moment, The average quality is still quite good. Where the issue is coming at the moment is the low dry matter. So with the low dry matter in the grass, the dry matter intake going to obviously be lower than what you'd expect. But store cattle at the moment should, on good quality grass for this time of the year, should be able to achieve in around that kilo of live weight gain from grass alone. But I say this is largely dependent on the quality of grass. Where farmers have been able to get out and top and manage the grass well, that it is a good short lush grass, that should have a high ME. Now, I accept the dry matter will be down, but certainly that grass will have a higher quality. If, on the other hand, cattle are grazing stable material with MEs down to 10, 10.5, obviously you'll not get the same level of performance from such grass. So, you could have variation in performance from 0.5 to a kilogram per day, depending on the quality of the grass. Certainly this changeable variable weather at the moment will obviously, and certainly the wet weather, will lower the potential dry matter intake of the animals, in which will have a knock-on effect on performance. So it is weather and grass quality dependent at the moment.
Francis, what measures could be taken to avoid a drop in animal performance?
Well, in terms of measurements, to be taken, obviously throughout the grazing season, we would hope farmers would be taking the odd measurement in terms of live weight of the animal, just to monitor live weight gains. We would certainly feel it is important to monitor live weight gain throughout the summer. Most people will have their cattle in for worm treatment or whatever throughout the summer, and we certainly would be encouraging people to weigh them at that time and just monitor performance. Obviously, if you don't weigh them, you'll not have a good idea of dosage rate that you may be offering to animals for worming and whatnot. So it is important to weigh them to get a good handle on the weight for worming, but it's also equally important to compare how the performance is going. And if performance is below what you'd be expecting from your grass quality, depending, if you have good grass quality and you're expecting a kilo of live weight gain a day, if the animals are not doing that, we'd certainly be recommending to look at the animals and see what the issues may be. You may consider maybe getting the vet to take a few blood samples to just look for trace elements. Very often in grazing systems and in animals that's not getting supplemented, trace element deficiencies can be a problem, such as iodine and selenium. Some supplementation may be required to counteract that if animals are not performing as you would expect them to be.
Paul, how's the grazing season gone for you so far?
Well, folks, it's very much as Kat has said there, a slow spring with the drought. And I'm just looking here at the figures, and we had peak growth in mid to end June. That's a good bit later than it ought to be. But the interesting one is, in the 9th of June, because of the drought, we were going 9 kilograms of dry matter a day, and the 24th of June, we're up to 114. So it just goes to show the effects and the differences. The system's an all spring calving system, so we're very much dependent on the grass at the right time of year. So I had certain measures then that I had to take to offset the drought as it is.
Your area was particularly affected by the dry weather in May and June. What actions did you take to mitigate this?
Always a very difficult one to try to manage grass in a given year, let alone with a drought or with too much rain. But we learned a lot from 2018. So there were several things that made it easier for us this time round. First one was that in 2018, we had no surplus silage or anything in the system. We had actually sold in the springtime. So 2019 was a good grass year, so we had bales left over from the 2019 season, and this gave us a lot of comfort. And then with the knowledge that we had from 2018, we were able to do things slightly different. The main things in any of these situations is to try to decrease the demand. And so some of the things that we have done here, first of all, we grazed all the silage ground and kept on grazing it until the rain came. So we had very little silage taken, and that was fine because we knew we had the reserves. We also had beef ready to go early in the year, so that was sort of end of April, May, so they were sold off. Another interesting one which we tried to do or had to do is that we grazed the cows with their calves on heavier covers. Instead of trying to keep them in an ideal cover and coming around the rotation, we extended the rotation out, let the cows graze a heavier cover, put up a fencer so that the calves creep under the fencer and pick the best of the next paddock. This actually works quite well. Now, it wouldn't work with performance animals, but for cows and calves, it worked quite well. So the beef animals were expecting to get high growth rates. We had to keep them on rotation as best we could and extended it with this extra grass, which would have been the silage ground. We managed to get our way through all right without any supplementary feeding, which would have been another option, and until the rain came and then the grass started to come. Definitely a challenge, but a lot easier this time around than it was in 2018 with what we had already learnt.
Paul, what is the current grass situation on your farm?
Yeah, definitely a tale of two halves. When the rain came, the grass came. Now, in 2018, we all wondered at the end of the drought how long would it take for the grass to grow. And this time round, we expected to see what we now call a grass bounce or compensatory growth. And indeed, it happened just exactly as we predicted. Quite literally went from 9 kilograms in 1 week, and 2 weeks later, we're going 114 kilograms dry matter a day. So that gave us the opportunity then to start getting the wedge again, because it all comes at once. The wedge was lost, so we had to start creating our wedge and taking out silage, because there's obviously no silage or very, very little silage taken at this point. So that's really how we've managed. But there is plenty of grass there. We're running ahead of demand. We're growing 60 and utilising 48. So there won't be an issue, and we'll get a few bales of silage taken out along the way. An interesting one that always comes up is, what should you do about fertilisers? We sort of predicted that we wouldn't be overly dependent on too many bales, so we backed off some of the fertiliser applications during the drought, being mainly moisture dependent. But I think if you were really pushed and hadn't been able to reduce demand, you would have needed to have gone on probably with the normal amount of fertilisers and hoped that very little of it was lost, and then you would have got a better bounce. Our neighbours who did that, they got the same bounce as we had, but it was maintained, where our ground started running out of fizz after 7 or 10 days. And then we knew that there was a difference between those that put fertilisers on and those that didn't. So there's a lesson in there to be learned, which weren't really sure how the ground would react to that. And we got away with it because of our demand had been significantly reduced.
Francis, what can farmers do to maintain high performance for the remainder of the year?
So what can a farmer do to maintain quality or to maintain animal performance for the rest of the year? Well, I think it's important for farmers to do benchmark and set what are the targets that they're wanting to achieve. From a grass perspective, said earlier, the weather is going to be very dependable. In terms of research, we have looked at supplementing livestock with concentrates at pasture. And certainly, if you put at any stage, whenever you put concentrates in, you are going to get an increase in performance. But that increase in performance comes with a cost. In terms of looking at maintaining high levels of performance, if the grass quality can be maintained high, store cattle do not need concentrates at grass. We have looked at a number of research projects where the later half of the grazing season, store cattle were supplemented with concentrates. And yes, you did get an increase in performance, but in those cases, you may have resulted in an additional 20, 30 kilos of live weight at the time of housing. But whenever you took those animals through for, say, a 100-day finishing period, that performance was gone. So essentially, that 100, 150 kilograms of meal that you put into the animals was a cost to the system and did not result in any higher carcass weight at slaughter. Really, feeding cattle at pasture, store cattle at pasture, is not economically viable unless you're going to market them and not actually house them yourself. In terms of suckler cows, this time of the year, spring calving cows should have passed their peak lactation. Their milk yield will be starting to drop off. So really, you've been wanting to put as much good quality grass into calves as possible. And certainly by possibly grazing calves ahead of cows could be an option. Get as much of the quality grass into the calves as possible, and slow the cows back and make the cows clean up. But obviously with the weather at the moment and the changeable weather, cattle are quite unsettled with the low dry matters, and that kind of challenges. But basically, it's just trying to keep them moving and possibly working a paddock system and moving them frequently will minimise damage to the land. Land conditions and poaching is a problem. By moving them on more frequent will obviously minimise that damage and maximise the performance of the animals. Where animals are to be finished, I suppose the question is what ground conditions are like. Good quality grass, you can finish cattle off good quality grass depending on the correct genetics. If you're working with lean type or lean breeds and lean animals and they need extra fat cover, going in with extra energy will certainly do that through concentrates, and there would be a benefit to doing that. But you need to look at the ground conditions. if you're putting throcks out into the field and the animals are coming to eat that supplementation, if they're going to be poaching around throcks, it may be better just to accept a slightly lower level of performance and actually put the cattle into the house and finish them in the house on the meal. On the other hand, if you're just wanting a little bit of extra fat cover, you could feed meal for a few weeks pre-slaughter to get that cover. Grass quality is the dry matter is the big issue at the moment. Protein tends to still be quite good. So for supplementing finishing cattle at the moment, protein supplements such as rolled barley, or depending on the type of the animal, don't need a high protein ration. Just a low protein ration should be satisfactory to get the fat cover on the animals.
Paul, you use a combination of silage and fodder crops for winter feeding. How is it progressing this year?
Yes, it's our main stem for the winter feeding. The fodder crops, it's kale, main crop kale that went in this year. Very, very moisture dependent at the point of sowing. We had all the ground prepped and ready and rolled, and then we just had to wait for the rain. So whenever we saw rain in the forecast, we had to spray off whatever weeds came for steel seed bed, and then we sowed it in kale with grass seed harrow and rolled it back down again. And for the most part, it's coming quite well. One field has a few weeds come through it, and we've tried to spray those with limited success. But I think the crop now looks like it will outpace the chickweed and will come through at this stage. We've already started putting bales in the middle of the field. In the ideal situation, the bales are made one in the field, and then they're lifted, and one left straight into the kale fields. This year, that hasn't worked out because we had no silage early on. So we will put bales in the fields now whenever, the weather's dry, and leave that for the winter time. Another thing we always do or try to do is make sure the infrastructure of electric fencing is set up in the field to make our life easier. And you do it now during the dry weather, or you have to do it in whenever the days are short and it's raining. So it's much easier to get it done now. And that usually involves a hot wire or a live wire down one side of the field. Every time you hang the other wire on it, then it's live. The fodder crops, they're okay now. And I'd say within the next couple of weeks, we'll know just how good or bad they're going to be. But that's the system, and that if they don't grow as well as they ought to, it just means a bit of extra silage brought into the fields.
Looking forward, what will be the key actions you'll be taking as regards grassland management over the next couple of weeks?
We're running slightly ahead of demand at the minute, but we haven't taken much silage, and we haven't really got our wedge sorted out yet. So basically, we will be concentrating on keeping the best of grass ahead of the beef cattle that are, especially the ones that are finishing. Going back to Francis there, it's a grass system for our beef cattle as well. They're Angus type cattle, so they will finish off grass provided you keep them going. We will probably come out, instead of 1,500, we'll maybe come out at 1650 and move them around onto the better grass a bit quicker. The cows themselves, all the calves have been peak grazing ahead of the cows for quite some time. Interestingly now, we're now estimating that the calves creeping forward are eating over 30% of the next paddock by the time the cows get into them. They're very aggressive now about popping in underneath the fencer and getting to the good bit of grass. And at one point there, we saw over 90 calves through and ahead out of 110 calves in the one batch had popped in next door for a feed. So that's looking after itself. We're taking out paddocks, we've cut some today. So any paddocks that are available to take out, usually about 3,000, 3,200 has been taken out as well. And by way of fertiliser, we will fertilise now for the August and September rotation and try to just either maximise the number of bales taken out or maximise the amount that's been built up for later in the year. We're now really thinking about what we're closing off and when we're closing off and that type of thing. Basically, as good measurement, good management, and try to make it stretch and try to keep performance up.
What practical recommendations would you give to beef farmers who are looking to get more from grass?
Yeah, well, the point we can't get away from is grass is our cheapest type of feed. We have taken on additional ground, and we always start with a soil analysis, correct the indices and the lime in particular, correct those as best we can. That was always the first step, always maybe the first year. We do that even before we consider reseeding. So if we're happy with that, then we'll go ahead and reseed. Effectively, then we can grow more grass. And then just as importantly, we'll have to be able to utilise the grass. And I keep emphasising to people, this is a learned skill. You need to put a bit of time and effort into learning how to do this. We have basically set up paddock systems across the whole farm. You have electric wire fencing, be it temporary or semi-temporary, and you've got water troughs to put in. We need to measure so we can allocate accordingly. We need to be not afraid to take out surplus in bales whenever it's necessary. Remember, it's a very high quality product. Try to get it dried. Bet a wilt, maybe 24, 48 hour wilt, so it sits better in the bales. The other thing is, when you set this all up and you think it's going to be easy, it isn't, because you've got the weather to deal with. So you must be flexible within this system and work with the weather. You'll not hold cattle in a paddock if you know there's going to be a half an inch of rain. Likewise, if it's very good weather and you can hold them an extra half day and graze a bit tighter, you just do that. So build flexibility into the system and learn how to manage the grass growth and the demand that you have on the farm. It's a skill well worth learning. In the beef industry, I think we're a bit far behind our dairy neighbours in being able to both grow more grass and utilise more grass efficiently.
That's it for this episode of the GrassCheck Podcast. And my thanks to Kat Huson and Francis Lively from AFBI and Paul Turley for joining us. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe to the podcast. You can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts, as well as Spotify. For more information, you can go to the GrassCheck website, www.agresearch.org/GrassCheck, and the GrassCheck social media channels. I'm Jason Rankin, and join us the next time for the GrassCheck Podcast. Until then, stay safe.